All right, are we ready to start here?
Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Hawaii Book and Music Festival and today's session, which is going to be the Bitcoin solution for Hawaii energy. Extremely interesting topic, one that I didn't even know were related to each other, but we have an excellent speaker here. His name is Nathaniel Harmon. He is a graduate of the University of Hawaii with a master's degree in Marine Geology and Geochemistry, and he's been involved in Bitcoin since 2013. He founded Blockchain Solutions Hawai and also created the Blockchain Helpdesk and provides consulting and educational services here in Hawaii, as well as other areas. And without any further ado, let me turn it over to you, Daniel. Take it away.
Hey, thank you, Sterling. And yeah, let me share my desktop. So I think this is, yeah, so thank you, Sterling, and thank you, Roger, for putting this whole thing on. I know how much work goes into organizing a conference. Well, or convention. I've done work with the Democratic Party of Hawaii and organizing graduate symposiums. Yeah, so the topic of the presentation is, Bitcoin, energy, and Hawaii. My name is Nathaniel Harmon, and I founded Blockchain Solutions Hawai back in 2018, and we specialize in Bitcoin layer 2 software development. So Lightning Network things, sidechains, which if you think about Bitcoin as like the internet, sidechains are like the website equivalent. And we do zero knowledge asset security, where we can take someone from zero knowledge to being able to safely and securely securing their own and self-custodying their own assets. And we do consulting and business integration. A lot of major companies have a Bitcoin strategy, and everyone in Hawaii should as well. So before we get started, it's important to know what this presentation is not. This is not a Bitcoin 101. This is not a subjective discussion on what is and is not a productive use of energy. This is going to be mostly an energy talk. So outline split into two parts. Part one is going to be solely focused on energy and Hawaii. And, we'll talk about some of the issues facing Hawaii's 2045 energy goals. And then part two, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and give you some background into, how Bitcoin mining works and the economics that flow from that. And we hope to answer the question of, well, does or can Bitcoin help or hinder our energy issues? So starting with energy economics, we're going to give you a really basic, crash course. Fossil fuels. Most people have a pretty good understanding of fossil fuels, and it's that the capital expense of a fossil fuel infrastructure are going to be a lot less than the operational expense over the lifetime of that infrastructure. It's relatively cheap to build a new coal or petroleum-fired power plant, but then over the course of that, plant's life, the cost of the energy, the coal or petroleum, will end up eclipsing that capital expense. Now, renewables are the opposite, where it's really, really expensive to initially build that resource, the hydroelectric dam. But once you build it, well, the water is flowing, the river flows for free and the wind blows and the sun shines, right? You don't have to pay for that. And there's two types of renewable energy. So there's dispatchable energy and non-dispatchable. Dispatchable is going to be your firm supply, your base load, things like hydropower, geothermal energy, or more controversially, nuclear energy. And dispatchable renewable sources are an economy of scale. So here we have a little cartoon of plant size versus the energy cost, what you would pay. So the smaller the plant, the higher the end consumer energy price is going to be. But the bigger the plant size, you start a massive reduction in, you see a massive reduction in consumer energy price. And just like with any infrastructure, you don't build these things for what you need today. You build them for an anticipated future demand. Now, for fossil fuels, this isn't really a problem because it's mostly operational expense. So if you don't need the total capacity of the plant, you just simply don't purchase the petroleum or coal and don't burn it. But for things like dispatchable renewables, well, the river's still flowing and the geo is still thermal. So this leads to an idle capacity. So even if you build the large plant, having that idle capacity is going to push you back up the hill. Now, your non-dispatchable sources of energy are going to be your wind and your solar and your wave. And these are intermittent, right? And we know this because the sun only shines half the day. The wind's not always blowing. And they have an economy of scale where the bigger you build, the cheaper the energy is. But you also require, extras like you need storage and smart grid. And this, again, pushes you back up the hill. So how does Hawaii consume energy? You know, we've got the residential section, commercial, industrial, and then of course, the big piece of the pie is transportation at 56.6%. And that's pretty much evenly split between ground, air, and ground and marine, and then air. So that's how we consume it. How do we produce it? Well, we know that the goal is 100% renewables by 2045. And that means, here's a little graph of how we produce the energy that we consume. You can see the vast majority comes from petroleum and coal. And so this means that if we want to meet our goal, we're going to end up having to replace 75.2% of our current production. Now, another goal is to replace our combustion engine ground fleet, right? You know, cars moving away from petroleum and gas to electric vehicles. This means we're also going to have to add that in. So when we adjust for ground transport, we end up with around 84% of the way to go. Now, as far as our current renewable portfolio, so back in 2019, renewable production was around 20.3%. And that's split between dispatchable and non-dispatchable. So for dispatchable sources of energy, we have bioenergy, so that's things like ethanol, biodiesel, landfill, and sewage-based digester gas, agricultural, animal residue waste, and municipal solid waste, the green bin. And of course, we have some hydropower. Now, the vast majority of our renewable energy comes from non-dispatchable sources, your solar and your wind. And relying so heavily on intermittent sources of energy creates a few problems, those being curtailment and a firm supply. Now, curtailment is pretty simple. It's an imbalance between supply and demand. And, you know, think of this like when in the middle of the day, when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, we're generating more energy than the grid needs. So the load, and this, is waste. So we can't use it, so we just don't produce it or ground it out. Now in 2020, Hawaii curtailed around 56 gigawatt hours worth of energy. So had that energy been sold to the grid at what we pay, around 30 cents per kilowatt hour, around what we pay, that would equate to about $20 million of energy that we dumped. And Maui alone was 51 gigawatt hours of that. And this is a problem that's expected to get worse and worse and worse. Now, due to the power purchase agreements with independent power producers, the utility has to pay for that curtailed energy. So even though nobody can use it and it's either not generated or just ground out, they still have to pay 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And so because of that, there's a mandate to reduce this curtailment. And so the dilemma that this creates is that, well, the more renewable energy you produce, the cheaper the energy cost should be. But curtailing that energy leads us to higher energy costs. So let's just store it. All this brings up the second problem, firm supply. So when we're talking about intermittent sources, we need to talk about the capacity value. So particularly for wind and solar resources here on Oahu. So centralized solar is around 6.1%. And the best way to think about this is, what is the new capacity of that resource that is required to meet 100 megawatts of load? So with centralized PV, in order to meet 100 megawatt load, you'll need 1.6 gigawatts of load. Now, distributed PV is much worse. And so that's a 52 times, multiple. So for every 100 megawatts that you want to meet, you need 5,200 megawatts of capacity. And wind is the best with 6 to 1. Now, Oahu's firm supply is around 1,800 megawatt hours. And all the other islands are either around 200 megawatts or much lower. And this has led our utility company to conclude that even with an abundance of renewable energy resources, the power system must have a complement of firm dispatchable thermal resources. And these thermal resources will be fueled by liquefied natural gas. And let's see why. So since I'm here on Oahu and I live here, let's talk about one of my favorite snorkel spots and dive spots. Let's talk about E-Beach. I love going down there and getting shot out the exhaust pipe. A lot of fun. But, why is the exhaust pipe there? Well, there's a power plant right behind it. Why is it called E-Beach? It's by the power plant. And, Kahe has a capacity of around 650 megawatts, which is about a third of Oahu's firm capacity. So what would it look like to replace that one plant, a third of our firm supply with, say, wind? Well, if we want to go with offshore wind with a capacity value of 16.8%, that means in order to meet that 650 megawatts, we would need almost 4,000 megawatts worth of capacity. When we look, around the world at some, recently built offshore wind, we look here at the UK at this East Anglia 1, and we can look at the energy density and the cost that, per kilowatt there. And we end up that in order to replace Kahe, we're going to need around 550 turbines. And this will, take up an area of around 1,600 square kilometers, which is ever so slightly bigger than the area of Oahu. So what that looks like is that we're going to have to essentially bulldoze the entire channel between Oahu and Maui, and we're going to have to put up 500 plus turbines. And the total cost is going to be 19 or so $billion. And then on top of that, we're going to need battery to store it all. So, chalk up another $1 billion. It's a lot of money. Now, if we want to go with solar, well, you'll see in a second why distributed solar is not going to get us there. So let's talk about centralized solar. So with a capacity of 6.1%, in order to replace that 650 megawatts, we're going to need 10,000 megawatts of capacity. So if we look at the top of the line PV modules, nominal power, the area, how big they are and how much they cost, this would require 31 million solar panels and for a total area of around 80 square kilometers. And that's with no space in between them. So there's no daylight getting to the, the ground. And, that kind of looks like, what that looks like is this little square here. So as soon as you start putting some space in between, it starts getting much bigger very fast. And the total cost for just the PV alone, so not, how much to purchase the land, bulldozing the land, that would be around, $3.5 billion plus, of course, you got to add in batteries. And these are big numbers, and we just simply don't have the land on Oahu. So now that we have a better understanding of some of the issues, let's talk about Bitcoin. So there is a myth that one transaction on the Bitcoin network consumes the amount of power that the average US household does over 60 days. And this is just inaccurate. And you can think of it in a, better way to think of it is similar to gold. It takes a lot of energy to pull the gold out of the ground and then process it. But once you have that gold, handing it to someone else costs you nothing. No energy, right? I've personally done a couple hundred transactions per second between two of my Bitcoin nodes, and paid no more energy than my computer right now. And it's important to understand that Bitcoin is unique. So it's in a class of its own. Lumping Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies together is disingenuous, and it's usually done by people who are trying to sell you something else. Now, a differentiation needs to be made between capital B Bitcoin and little b Bitcoin. Capital B Bitcoin is the Bitcoin network, and that's composed of 4 separate parts. There's a consensus mechanism, there's the blockchain database, there's a peer-to-peer network, and then there's the token, the Bitcoin token. Now, you might hear people say, oh, I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin, I'm a big fan of blockchain. Well, blockchain is just a type of database. And it's a type of database that had absolutely no use for the 30 years before Bitcoin came along. And a blockchain is only as secure as the consensus mechanism that secures it. And Bitcoin has the proof of work as its consensus mechanism. So when people say, oh, the real technology is blockchain, that's false. The consensus mechanism, the proof of work, is the real technology. And I'd be willing to entertain questions about it, but proof of stake is another competing consensus mechanism. But proof of stake is essentially an illegal security offering that happens to offer a dividend, and it's just simply not as secure. So what is proof of work? Well, it's also called Bitcoin mining. And the common way for people to explain Bitcoin mining is that, oh, it's these computers solving a really complicated math problem. That's not the best way to think about it. It's closer to a game of needle in a haystack, with the needle being new Bitcoin. Now, that needle is randomly hidden by the protocol itself, and the game resets after the needle is found. So just like this guy, if he finds the needle in the haystack, he'll pull it out, present it. He can show it to all the participants, and it's very hard to find that needle. But once you have the needle, it's very easy to prove that you've done the work of finding it. Everybody can, all the other participants can just look at it and say, oh yeah, he found it. Let's reset the game. And so that's the proof of work. Now, the size of that haystack is adjustable, and it's done, again, automatically by the protocol. Now, the haystack size is targets around a 10-minute game time. So regardless of how many people are searching through this haystack for the needle, the haystack size adjusts so that the game takes around 10 minutes. So the more people that are searching, the larger the haystack. The less people that are searching, the smaller the haystack. Now, just like this guy who's looking for a needle, he's going to have a support team to bring him water and food. Well, searching for the Bitcoin needle also requires energy. And so the larger the haystack, the more energy that is, expended to look for that needle. And when we talk about, security, that energy is the security of the Bitcoin blockchain. And Bitcoin is by far, many orders of magnitude, the most secure database, not just in cryptocurrency, but in the entire world. People often say things like, oh, Bitcoin isn't backed by anything, but it's that energy that you have to expend that does back Bitcoin. It's backed by the fundamental currency of the universe. Now, some basics about the energy economics of Bitcoin mining. It is complementary to renewables. So it has the operational expense is much greater than the capital expense. And this is pretty, this is easy to understand. The machines themselves that do the mining are much cheaper than the lifetime cost of the energy to power them. And once you put power into a computer, that that energy has to come out somewhere, and it does so as heating, and it creates heat. So this means that your operational expense is pretty much entirely powering and cooling those miners. And this means that the profit from mining Bitcoin is solely dependent on the cost of energy. In 2019, Bitcoin used around 61 terawatt hours, and 2020, it's about 100 terawatt hours. And when we look at a distribution of miners around the world, we see that they gravitate naturally to cheap energy and cold temperature. So here's two tables of those major Bitcoin mining regions. And what we see is a bifurcation between areas with a lot of renewable energy. So the renewable penetration, how much of that region's energy is derived from renewables, versus, you see the bifurcation between almost 100% and almost none. So when we look at each of those regions weighted against their total hash power, in 2019, the renewable distribution of Bitcoin mining, the whole network, was around 38%, which is about double Hawaii. And it's actually getting even higher now. And so recently, China banned Bitcoin, and as of this month, they have around 0% of the total mining hash power. And China was one of the dirtiest mining regions, and so getting rid of them, and they've now moved to places, Texas for the solar. So now that's pushing the renewable percentage to around 50%. So why is Bitcoin beating the state of Hawaii in renewable? Well, we can actually look to China for the answer to that. So before China banned Bitcoin, there was an interesting phenomenon called the Great Bitcoin Migration. There are two major regions of Bitcoin, or were, in China. There's the Sichuan and Yunnan province, which gets most of their energy from hydroelectric power, and then Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang, which are in the north, which get most of their energy from the cheap coal that they mine. Now, during the course of the year, the miners would physically pack up and move based on where it was more economically viable. So during the winter, when it's cold, they move to the north, Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang, where the even though the coal is slightly more expensive than the hydroelectric power, the savings from the cold temperature causes the Bitcoin mining during the winter to be more profitable there. Now, during the rainy season, all these miners pick up and move to the Sichuan and Yunnan provinces to take advantage of all the excess electricity generated from the rainy season. And this is because Bitcoin functions as the ideal buyer of last resort. So they can provide a dispatchable demand. So during the rainy season, these hydroelectric plants are producing way more energy. They have way more energy than the region actually needs. So the Bitcoin miners come in and say, hey, we'll buy all of that excess energy. We're not going to give you the full, retail value, but we'll buy it because anything is better than nothing at this point. So Bitcoin allows for 100% revenue generating energy use. Now, how does this work with curtailment in Hawaii? So let's look at Maui's oversupply between, the curtailment just from oversupply from Q1 2020 through Q2 2021. And, this is based on the average curtail power purchase agreement of around 10 cents per kilowatt hour, which, because that utility has to pay for it, they paid around $6.75 million between Q1 2020 and Q2 2021 for energy that was not provided. It was just waste. And they spent $6.75 million doing that. Now, what would happen if we developed a model where we looked at what would happen if, instead of dumping that energy that they're already paying for, what if they had used Bitcoin mining to recoup some of that lost revenue? So, the model, we subtract your cooling costs and, sunlight adjusted and a Poisson distribution of mining revenue. And we came up with, two general models. There's the Bitcoin that's sold at the time of production. So as soon as you produce Bitcoin, you immediately convert it to US dollars and sell it. And you can do that through futures contracts. And the first ETF was traded on the first Bitcoin futures traded ETF on the New York Stock Exchange this week. And it turns out that, so this Bitcoin sold at the time of production is going to be this green line. And it turns out that if they had mined Bitcoin, instead of just dumping the energy and leaving the money sitting on the table, they would have made about, $8.75 million with a recovery rate of about 130%. So it would have been more profitable to do this than, dumping it. Now, the second way you can think about this is, well, let's say instead of selling it at the time of production, you hold it, like on your treasury balance, similar to how Tesla holds Bitcoin on their treasury balance, or MicroStrategy, or now El Salvador does. Had they held that Bitcoin, that's going to be this orange line. I call this the HODL method. And back in June, the price in June was around $36,000, $37,000, somewhere in that range. Had they held that Bitcoin, it would have been worth $20.1 million back in June. And now, obviously, that number has gone up. It's almost double that now. So let's go back to the Oahu problem. So what are our options to solve the firm supply of Oahu? So, well, nuclear. So, well, even if we get, the mythical thorium reactor and, it works and we can build one, we can't do it here in Hawaii because in the off chance that something happens that we're not aware of, there's no fallout. There's no fallout zone. So nuclear can't work. Now, from where I'm sitting, it looks like the current strategy to replace our firm energy supply is gravitating towards bioenergy, right? Things like, ethanol or solid waste, right? Now, bioenergy is a carbon-based energy source. And, at a high level, the solution to our carbon burning problem just can't be burning more carbon. They use creative accounting methods to say that, oh, bioenergy is carbon neutral, because if I burn it over here and then plant a tree over here, that cancels out. But the problem is that, you got the land use changes, the nutrient use, you have to cultivate it, you have to cut down trees, you have to process it into energy, then you have to move it across the ocean to get to us. It ends up not being much better than natural gas. But bioenergy is classified as renewable energy, countrywide at the moment. Now, geothermal, right? We all know that, Kilauea is thermaling right now. So the Big Island has quite a bit of geothermal energy. Maui a little bit less. Now, the problem with geothermal energy is the political palatability of it. You know, the Puna plant had a, you know, it was enough of a headache to get that built. So the question is whether is it politically palatable to exploit all of, you know, the Big Island and Maui's potential geothermal energy to feed Oahu? You know, and then of course you have to cable them, and that has a lot of cost to it. I'm not sure. Could it? Yes, possibly, but I don't think it's going to happen. Hydropower. Well, we don't have a you know, a river here, but you know, Kauai is doing the pumped hydro, which is super cool. You know, it's a Sisyphusian task, but you know, the question on Oahu is where do you put it? Again, we don't have the land. Now, when I look at the state, I don't see land, I see ocean, right? So what are our ocean resources? Well, we all like to talk about waves, and wave energy is super cool. But even if we were to site all of Oahu's shoreline segments, we're still coming up short. You know, it only equates to about 17% of the energy demand that we need. And again, this is, you know, wave energy is a intermittent resource. So then you have to, you know, get batteries for it. The other option is something called ocean thermal energy conversion. Now, ocean thermal energy conversion, or OTEC, has the potential to supply more than 100% of all of our energy needs. Now, the challenge is that there's no prototype operational data. But let's look a little bit closer. So what is OTEC? Well, OTEC is a technology that was first proposed, you know, around 150 years ago, and the first plant was built 100 years ago. This was unfortunate because it was about around the time that we discovered oil in the Middle East. So that didn't pan out. Now, what is it? So essentially, OTEC is using the ocean as a giant solar battery. You take cold water from the deep ocean, you know, 1,000 meters down or so, and then you take water, warm water from the surface. And based on the difference between those temperatures, the warm water, surface water, and the cold, deep water, you can generate energy through a Rankine cycle using an ammonia loop. Now, this is a zero emission firm supply of energy, and it doesn't take up any land. It would be a floating facility with a straw essentially hanging down. You know, so you don't even doesn't have to be moored. And you can do this 10 miles offshore. And these things are about the size of a container ship. So, you know, I don't hear anybody in Lanikai complaining about container ships 10 kilometers out, 10 miles out. So no land, you know, we're not destroying the, you know, our precious coral, deep sea corals. And even better, Hawaii leads the world in OTEC research. Between Oceanit and Mackay Ocean Engineering, we are the world's hub for this technology. Mackay even has a 100 kilowatt testing facility on the Big Island. Some of you may have seen it. So why, if we lead the world in this technology, and it's our only realistic chance to supply 100% of our firm energy needs, why aren't we doing this? Why is there no prototype operational data? And it comes back to that cartoon that I showed you at the beginning. Here is that again, except with real numbers on them. You know, plant size versus capital cost. The smaller the plant, the more expensive it's going to be compared to, you know, with the based on the energy. So the bigger, cheaper, smaller, more expensive. And so why don't we just build the big one? Well, you have to build a smaller one first, right? You have to build the prototype before you can build the actual facility. And this is where the problem is that the small plants, between 1 and 20 megawatts, these prototypes, they have never been shown to be profitable. We're talking about if you built one, the energy cost to you, the consumer, would be somewhere between 50 cents and $1. And I'm mad enough at paying 30 cents per kilowatt hour, so I'm definitely not going to pay more. And that's why they don't get built. No one's going to invest $200 million in something that's not going to be profitable. Now, when you look at the large plants, the 50 to 100 megawatts, well, we're talking about energy costs from 6 cents per kilowatt hour to 22 cents per kilowatt hour. That sounds good to me. Now, since we did the thought experiment of replacing Kahe, what would replacing Kahe with these large plants look like? Well, around $5 billion, about what it would cost to do it with solar. So we have this chicken and the egg problem. In order to get the chicken, you have to have the egg. So we came up with an egg solution. So I was working with Richard Argall over at Mackay Ocean Engineering, and we were discussing, a 20 megawatt OTEC plant ship. And we did this, because if we attach it to shore and sell the energy to the grid, we're looking at 50 cents to $1 per kilowatt hour. No one's going to pay that. So we optimize for Bitcoin mining and doing, 100% of the energy for Bitcoin mining. Said, well, if nobody's going to pay for it, it's not even worth connecting it to the grid in the first place. So, and what's interesting is that Mackay already had plans for an integrated data center on one of these things. They tried to make it work, but data centers just simply aren't profitable enough. So we can integrate Bitcoin mining directly into the plant ship on board using the cold water supply for cooling the machines. This means that when you're mining Bitcoin, you don't have to pay for half of the costs, your cooling costs. And with no grid connection, you can have a grazing plant. So it's getting to be winter here, and I can feel it that the water temperature is dropping. Well, because OTEC works by the difference in temperature between the surface and the deep water, during the winter here, it becomes less efficient. OTEC becomes less efficient. So instead, since we're not connected to the grid, we can have this OTEC plant just floating around, following the sun's equatorial plane. And we can do all of this in international waters, which ends up, saving on the permitting costs, you're saving years off of the lead time, getting permits, all of those things. And when you optimize for Bitcoin mining of a 20 megawatt OTEC plant ship, you end up with a levelized cost of energy at around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. This is incredible. So what we did was we modeled what it would look like, in the past, if we had built one of these at this cost of energy and mined with it. So we have the two models. We have the immediate sale model, and the blue line is going to be your capital expense, how much it costs to build. And then the orange line here is going to be the Bitcoin profit, having sold that Bitcoin as soon as you mine it. And we chose a couple of starting dates, before a major jump in price, after a major crash in price. And, these two are major crashes. This one is right before. So, regardless of when you started doing this, this was always profitable to do at 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, the fun one is the HODL method. This is where, again, you hold the Bitcoin that you produced, everything above that 10 cents per kilowatt hour, you just hold it. Well, had you done that in 2016, you would have paid for 10 of these facilities already. If you had done that 2017, you would have paid itself off. And again, all of these graphs end before, at around $36,000. So, now it's even more. And so, people have been trying for decades to make OTEC profitable. They've tried integrating secondary product production, like using the energy for ammonia or desalination or a whole host of other things. But the issue with all of them is that they sacrifice efficiency of the energy production by using an open cycle process. And doing this makes both of the production of the secondary product and the energy less efficient. Now, this model, this represents the first reliably profitable secondary product that can be integrated into closed cycle OTEC without an efficiency loss. And if this can be done with a smaller plant, due to the economy of scale, the large plant stands to be the single most profitable method of production for both Bitcoin and energy in general in Hawaii. The end goal would be to have a fleet of the large ships, providing Hawaii's base load, while onboard mining farms provide a reverse battery to soak up all the energy. So this is called the reverse battery solution. So, Hawaii has virtually unlimited natural energy resources, yet we currently and will continue to rely on carbon-based energy, and we will pay the highest prices in the nation. Why? Because fossil fuels are more profitable here. And, unlike other states and nations that can just export their energy to their neighbor, not only are we stranded from the rest of the country, but each island's grid is independent. And so we have all these, extra safety measures because, we can't have the power going out. I think it's time that we embrace curtailment. Instead of fighting economics by fighting the economy of scale and, mandating that we reduce curtailment, let's let it run rampant with an all of the above approach. Over the last month, we've heard a lot about circular or donut economics, but one thing that's been lacking is the how. The inherent economics of Bitcoin mining perfectly overlap with renewable energy, creating a natural incentive mechanism to build out more renewable infrastructure faster. Using Bitcoin mining, we can harness the power of the wind and the waves and volcanoes and sun and ocean, turning it into economic energy to fuel our transition. And then, of course, in the process, we're creating a new major industry that brings money into the state and brings the cost of energy down for everyone. And at this point, this may be our only option. This exact solution has demonstrated to work over the last 10 years. It's worked in Iceland, the Pacific Northwest, China, El Salvador, and Texas now. I talked to a lot of mining companies, and they're building 720 megawatt solar farms using this exact method. But with most things, we're going to fight it and then embrace it only after we've already squandered our natural advantage. So what can you do? Well, the easiest thing would be to integrate dispatchable Bitcoin mining into our integrated demand response portfolio plan. We can reopen the net energy metering program, which I'm in, and instead of having it feed back into the grid, because Bitcoin is distributed, these mining farms don't have to be geographically centralized. You can have a single mining unit in a home, each home with solar panels, all working in concert together. Integrating this with updating our curtailment storage forecasting with this, the Build Back Better plan, when and if it gets passed, will provide a lot of money to the state. And this is this is something that we should really look into. And, thinking about renewable energy plus Bitcoin mining, it's the biggest investment opportunity this state has had in decades at this point. We're leaving money on the table, and if we really want to meet our goals, we need to be looking at all of the above. So thank you. I'll stop screen share, and there we are.
All right, thank you very much. I guess at this point, we can entertain some questions. Here's one. With all the limitations of that the state has placed on cryptocurrency in Hawaii, what can we do to encourage their buy-in?
Well, there's no, there's no laws in place right now to discourage Bitcoin mining in general. And a lot of the laws that we have in place are, beneficial, because in this industry, there's a lot of scams. Virtually everything besides Bitcoin is a scam. The HECO is already paying for the energy. There's almost nothing stopping them from using that curtailed energy to mine Bitcoin. I mean, I know back in the day we would mine Bitcoin in our graduate offices, graduate school offices. But yeah, there's nothing stopping us at this point.
And I suspect that this kind of goes hand in hand with, and this is, to me, typical of what happens in Hawaii is, how do we generate the political will to make these changes? Because these are big changes that need to be made. And I guess if I've learned anything in the years that I've been around, it takes time to do that. And, of course, now is always the best time to start, but definitely, we need to look at how do we generate that willpower to go and make some of these changes that are going to be needed.
Well, the good thing about this, using Bitcoin mining to solve our energy problem is it's an economic solution to an economic problem. And so, there's nothing preventing us at the state level, HECO at the state level from doing this, nothing. And so, and we've been trying for years to find the right economic incentive to generate more renewable energy, right? So, once you can demonstrate that, yes, this will be profitable, the natural incentive mechanism, that's circular economics, where you generate more energy, mine Bitcoin, take the profit to generate more energy, to mine more Bitcoin. It's a self-reinforcing loop. It's a positive feedback cycle. So this is a solution that can work even with the dysfunction in Congress, because it's a boardroom issue at this point.
Interesting, yeah. And of course, a lot of it's going to be based on education, and getting these people to understand, the concepts that you're putting forth. Probably are very foreign to them. And so, definitely we're going to need an educational process. Here's an interesting question. If this becomes common practice worldwide, doesn't the value of Bitcoin go down?
So historically, no. No, the value, the more institutional support, because it's a hard cap. So Bitcoin, there's only 21 million Bitcoin in existence, and they haven't been, you have to find there's 18 million or so in circulation now, another, 2.5, 3 million that haven't been found. No, that would be the opposite if it becomes common practice worldwide, which is an inevitability at this point, the price would go up. But I really hate talking about price. That's the one thing, you know, my business doesn't do, is we're not financial advisors and we don't sell Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah. So maybe economically, it would be the velocity of it would increase and therefore increase in value.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I guess you know, what happens if the question would be is, well, let's say we start doing this, and what happens if the price goes down? You know, doesn't it become less profitable to do that? Well, remember back to the haystack, if the price goes down, it becomes less profitable to mine Bitcoin. So the miners that are getting and have higher energy costs will drop off first, because it's less profitable for them. But because, you know, we're talking about curtailed energy, which by definition has no cost. It's a negative marginal cost. Or we're talking about, OTEC, which, you know, you're not paying half of your operational expense. Doing so here would still be profitable, and that's why, you know, the start dates that we that I modeled are both, you know, right before a big jump in price, and then, you know, during the middle of the crash, right? The 2019 price, you know, it was $20,000 2018 and dropped to a low of around $3,000, and still, because the cost of energy was so cheap, it's still profitable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting, right? How about changing the topic a little bit? What about the broadband requirements? You know, if we were to start doing this, what would it do to our broadband requirements?
So now this is the difference between Bitcoin mining and running a data center in general. With Bitcoin mining, the broadband is nothing, right? You're not the only thing that you are really broadcasting is a block that you find, right? Once you've solved the you found the needle, you broadcast that to the network. That's really the only data you need. Now, in these blocks that you find to add to the blockchain through the mining process, you bundle a bunch of transactions together, but these transactions are very small. So Bitcoin mining doesn't have the same data requirements as running a data center would. So if we're doing this in the middle of the ocean, the Starlink is way more than enough data that that you would need.
Yeah, so it's more I guess using computing power as opposed to network power.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Now,
and that's where the energy use comes from, when you have to increase the amount of horsepower that you need to do the mining.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I see one more question. When all the Bitcoin had been mined, what will happen to the profitability of a paired OTEC Bitcoin mining plant? So the last Bitcoin won't be found until 2140. So we've got a good runway. But long before that ever happens, the fee market will take over. And even in the past, there have been a number of blocks where the total fees in the block are larger than the new Bitcoin that's found. So the reward for finding a block is twofold. There's the fees that are attached to transactions, which are placed there, voluntarily by people to say, hey, you should include my transaction in the next block. So that's half of the block reward. The other half is the new Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin network functions best thought of as an international settlement network. You and I in the future are not going to be doing transactions on the base blockchain. You will be doing things on layer 2, which is what my business specializes in. And so the main chain will be for, large, international businesses transferring money to other countries, or, bundling many transactions together and sending them all as one. So you can have, long before the last Bitcoin is mined, you'll be, the fee market will have already taken over. So it's not something that really ends. It continues in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh. Wow. It's been interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's it's a very timely subject to bring up, and definitely something that needs an educational push, for the average person out there. Definitely something we ought to be thinking about. So Nathaniel, thank you very much. We really appreciate that. That's a great presentation that you brought on here.
Well, thank you. And thank you for moderating. And there's Roger. Thank you, Roger.
Well, this is the second time I've heard it. It's absolutely fascinating. And I have one question, which is, what's the timeline for establishing OTEC on this kind of scale? I mean, what assuming that just as with the rapid transit, someone said, okay, we're going to commit to $5 billion. Okay, we're going to commit to whatever it costs to put one of these up. How long does it actually take to establish it?
So to build the demonstration prototype OTEC plant, and then build the full-scale production plant, we're looking at about a decade or so. The lead time on the prototype for solely for Bitcoin mining, the small-scale version, it's 2 to 3 years or so, because you don't have the permitting overhead. But the larger one would be, once that's built, looking at a lead time of around 4 to 5 years on a 100 megawatt. But once those are built, once the 20 megawatts built and the 100 megawatts built, then you start getting the the production starts getting, the economy of scale of producing these things starts getting in place. So now you have factories that build the components specifically for this. So, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter over time.
So it's basically just in time for our goal. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
But you called it a boardroom decision. Is it not possibly not a political decision as well?
So for the 100 megawatt, locating it here, that has political, that there would be a permitting process, right? You have to have the cable to, to the island. And so there's the environmental regulation, you have to clear all the red tape. But, you would assume that because we're not using the land, we're not, bulldozing the side of one of our mountains. I don't foresee it being, as politically unpalatable as some of the other options.
Well, it could be that 5 years from now, we'll be facing a lack of decision about meeting the stated goals, and we have to do something in a hurry.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting speculative here. So I think we should leave it at real rather than speculative. But thank you very much. I think it was a terrific presentation, and I hope it has a real impact. And,
thank you.
And I much enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Attendees, you can hear this again if you go to the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series YouTube site, where you'll see it exactly as it's just been delivered. And it will then be edited somewhat for highlights. So I don't know how then anyone's going to do that. And that will be on our website for at least a year. So again, thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you very much. Aloha.